Hello and welcome to the Game Lore Archives. On today's episode we'll be exploring the tragic past of the now extinct Snow Elf race and the creation of the Twisted Falmer. Before we comment, people should note that the one sole survivor of the species is still technically classed as extinct. Now I strongly advise watching the next episode of the Nords, as this is really where the Snow Elf story kind of begins and ends and will tie very closely in with what we're going to talk about today.
So, while the Aldmer were separating and evolving, some Aldmeri travelled to Skyrim and would eventually become Snow Elves.
Sometimes referred to as Ice Elves.
Snow Elves are often viewed as a myth, as so little remains of their culture. However, they are very much real. In fact, in the early Merithic era, their society was said to rival the Altmer of Somerset Isles,
which is still classed as the most sophisticated race to this day.
Little is known about how their religion worked. However, we do know it focused on one goal, which was to become one with their god Auriel, because you're worth it. When the Nords arrived on the shores of Skyrim, they were greeted by the Snow Elves' advanced culture. They befriended the Elves and started construction of Sarthal, which would become the first settlement of man on Tamriel. And for a time, the two races lived side by side in peace. That all changed due to the Night of Tears.
Unbeknown to the Nords, the Ice Elves began watching their city, studying it for weaknesses in their defence. Then, on the Night of Tears, they felt that enough information had been gathered, and they attacked the unsuspecting Nords. Very few reports from the night survived. However, the attack was coordinated and focused on attacking the least defended parts of the city. Once they had slipped past the guards, the Elves spread out, killing anyone they found, and razed the city to the ground. Few survivors made it out of the city alive, but one who did was Ysgramor, leader of the Nords. Ysgramor swore his revenge on the Ice Elves and fled back to Atmora, the Nord homeland.
Why the Elves suddenly broke the peace between the races is unknown. However, two theories,
and one myth,
are the most commonly accepted. The first theory says that the Snow Elves began to fear the rapid expansion they saw of the Nords, and Sarthal's construction proved that if they left the Nords to their own, they would eventually surpass their own society, and fearing this outcome, they destroyed the city.
The myth that we mentioned is passed down through the generations of Nords. The story goes that although the Ice Elves and the Nords lived in peace, the Elves resented the human races since the beginning. Knowing this, the Daedric Prince Mehrunes Dagon sent horrific visions and dreams to the Elves of them being slaughtered by the Nordic people. This caused the existing anger of the Elves to grow until the race's paranoia reached a peak and they attacked the Nords to prevent the visions from coming true.
The final theory is that the Nords found a powerful artefact during the construction of Sarthal, named the Eye of Magnus. The Snow Elves learned the discovery and attacked so they could have control of the artefact. This explanation is the one that I find most believable, as it's the only one to have any proof at all. The rest are just stories that are passed down. So in the book called The Night of Tears, it explains an unknown artefact discovered to spark the slaughter. Then years later in the 4th era in the Skyrim game, the Dragonborn finds the artefact and brings it to the College of Winterhold.
Regardless of their reasoning, this attack would lead to the downfall of the Ice Elves. When Ysgramor arrived on Atmora, he gathered 500 of his strongest companions and returned to Skyrim to avenge the death of his people.
"Go forth,"
he roared,
"into the belly of this new land. Drive the wretched from the palaces of idleness. Oblige them to squalor and toil, that they would see their betrayed as the all sin against our kind. Give them no quarter, show them no kindness, for they would not give nor show you the same."
The Nords swept through Skyrim, eradicating any elves that they found, establishing not only a home for the Nords, but laying the foundations for the first human empire in all of Tamriel.
The Snow Elves were slow to react, surprised by the Nords' unbreakable spirit. They experienced heavy losses during the many skirmishes throughout Skyrim and Solstheim. Eventually the Snow Elves managed to rally an army and made a final stand on the island of Solstheim at Moesring Pass. The Battle of Moesring started with the Elves outnumbering the Nords. However, the Nordic people wore superior armour, wore better weapons, and were just better fighters in general. It quickly became apparent that this better gear, paired with the Nords' superior strength, was too much for the Elves to fight, and Sue's Moesring ran red with elven blood. With the Nords hacking through their enemies with ease, the battle seemed lost, when all of a sudden the Snow Elves started cheering and rejoicing.
"The Snow Elf Princes come! Doom is at hand!"
The very celebration unsettled the Nords. How could one prince cause so much hope in a situation that was clearly lost? That question was answered when the Snow Prince was seen. He was clearly an elf, but reports say that he is unlike any other of his kind. His spear and armour radiated an ominous glow of unknown, terrible magicka, and he rode a magnificent white horse. When the Blood Prince arrived, a great calm overcame the remaining Snow Elves, and the Snow Prince moved through his comrades like a ghost. When he finally arrived at the opposing army, he unleashed his fury. He rode into the Nordic fighters with the snow and ice swirling as if the very weather was controlled by him. His spear whistled as if weightless, and many of the Nords' greatest warriors fell to him. His onslaught continued for what seemed like ages, as he cut down the Nords with ease. His killing spree continued until the daughter of one of the fallen warriors, who was only 12 years old, mad with grief over her father's death, threw her father's sword at the Snow Prince. The sword hit the prince, and for the first time since he entered the fight, his spear stopped spinning.
At this point, the battlefield fell silent. The fighting paused as everyone turned to watch the Snow Prince fall from his horse, slain by a child. With their saviour's death, the Ice Elf's spirit shattered. Most fled from the Nords, running for their lives. The few who chose to remain and fight were cut down with ease. After the battle, the Nords burned the corpse of the fallen elves, however were filled with the awe of the Snow Prince. They honoured his death and fighting prowess by wrapping him in fine silks and buried him into a freshly dug grave. His armour and spear were presented on a pedestal of honour, and a tomb was filled with treasures worthy of royalty. The remaining elves that had the sense to flee managed to survive the slaughter and fled to the Dwemer for sanctuary. The dwarfs agreed to protect the Snow Elves and grant them safety in their cities, but at a heavy price. The Dwemer forced the Ice Elves to consume a toxic fungi which would render them blind. The Snow Elves knew they had no choice, so agreed to the twisted contract, and so began their lives as the blind servants to the dwarfs in exchange for protection from the Nords.
The Snow Elves served the Dwemer as much as they could while blind. What they didn't realise until later was how the Dwemer betrayed them, as well as forcing them to eat the toxic fungus. They also laced their food with poison, so the blindness not only affected the current generation of Snow Elves, but ensured their offspring would be blind also. And eventually the servants became slaves, forced to live together in cramped slave quarters, far away from the light of day.
This will sound a little off topic, but bear with me. Sai, the god of luck, was born with power to spread luck to everyone around him, but not himself. He became a soldier, allowing his people to win the war.
It's never really stated which war or army this refers to.
But as his luck never affected himself, he was eventually killed. The gods offered him immortality in exchange to spread his luck around. As Sai did not want to die, he did agree to this.
The reason Joe mentioned this is that when the Snow Elves were locked away as blind slaves, Sai did come and offer his help and good fortune to them to try and help the Elven race out of their horrendous predicament. However, like many of the Elven races, the Snow Elves were proud and turned Sai away. This was the stupidest possible thing they could have done, as not long after they realised their race was done for, and that their pride started to become burning anger, which would never leave the race. It was at this point, I believe, the Falmer race was truly born.
The rage of the Falmer erupted into a bloodbath against their slavers, with the Falmer killing anyone they could. The blind race used their ears to track enemies and managed to gain a footing in the depths of Black Reach. Here a war raged for decades, only ending when the Dwemer vanished. With the Dwemer gone, the Falmer slowly spread throughout Skyrim and remain there to this day.
The Falmer slowly de-evolved into the blind creatures we fight throughout Skyrim today. They are blind creatures who have gotten very good at tracking prey with their hearing. They are a bloodthirsty race who will attack anyone who crosses paths with them. The Falmer stayed dormant underground for most of the First Era, but since the Second Era, more and more reports are heard about surface raids, where the Falmer then attack crop, cattle, and attack civilians unlucky enough to meet them. These raids are becoming more and more organised as time goes on, leading people to speculate they are adapting and will eventually become surface-dwelling creatures once more.
Bear in mind that this might not be the only reason for the sightings of the Falmer on the surface. When the Dwemer vanished, their constructs hadn't gone with them, and guard the Dwemer ruins to this day. Some people believe the Falmer always wanted to attack the surface, but were prevented by the Dwemer's creations, which attack any non-dwarf on sight. They say it's due to the Falmer slowly destroying the machines throughout the years, which is why they can be seen today.
In Skyrim's Dawn's Guard expansion,
which is set in the 4th era,
we get to meet the last 2 snow elves, seemingly unaffected by time. One is a vampire, whose main dialogue is literally telling you how he wants to kill you. The last non-psychotic snow elf gives some really interesting information, however, regarding the Falmer, and I'm going to end the episode with just dialogue off him so you can hear it from him. He refuses to call the race the Falmer and instead refers to them as the Betrayed. His dialogue seems to hint at not only the Falmer gaining intelligence, but also a pocket of another remaining snow elves could remain somewhere, which could be used in a future game. And that's really all we're going to say this episode. So thanks ever so much for watching, and as I say, I will leave you with a bit of dialogue from the last snow elf, as it is really interesting.
Perhaps they'll never return to their former appearance, but over the centuries I've noticed a rise in their intellect. If a line of communication could be established with them, maybe they can find peace. It's the only way they'll discover that they weren't always malignant. They were once a proud and prosperous race. The twisted forms you've seen didn't occur overnight. It isn't a plague or a disease that ravaged our species. The dwarves may have stolen their sight, but it took many generations for them to become what they are today. I feel nothing but sympathy for the betrayed, despite my actions against them. But I'm afraid that they're well beyond a cure at this point. It's also quite possible that there are some other isolated conclaves of snow elves nestled elsewhere on Nirn.